Good evening, everyone, and welcome to night one of Worth the Wait, Thanks for Waiting launch event. We're excited to present this event with Random House's new wellness brand, Well Enough. We know that wellness means something different to everyone, wherever you are on your wellness journey, and we have experts in every area: health, nutrition, diet, cooking, fitness, mindfulness, spirituality, business, financial, emotional, parenting, relationships, and sharing curated content for what matters to you. There's never been a better time to start or deepen your wellness practice, and we are here to help. Follow at Well Enough on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and sign up for our newsletter. We'd also like to take time to thank our partner, Tatcha, for providing everyone with a 15% promotional code to all guests this evening. You should have received this promotional code in an email that we sent out via Eventbrite. If for some reason you haven't received the email, please let us know at pr@randomhouse.com. Random House has enabled auto-generated closed captions for this evening's event. To access the closed captions, please click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen. Please bear with us. These captions are auto-generated, so they may not be 100% accurate, but we will do our best. Please connect with other readers and guests using the chat function. We'd love to hear your thoughts, what you're reading, and how you're taking care of yourself. We just ask that everyone please stay respectful in the chat. And now I'm going to introduce our MC for the event, Dory's fantastic editor, Sarah Weiss.
Thanks, Katie. And hi, everybody. Welcome to night one of Worth the Wait, Thanks for Waiting launch event with the wonderful Dory Shafrir and an all-star lineup of guests. As Katie mentioned, I'm Sarah Weiss, Dory's editor, and I'm so excited that the launch for this book is finally here. And Thanks for Waiting, which Publishers Weekly just called heartwarming and witty in a starred review, Dory has given us a moving, vulnerable, and fully nuanced exploration of the way women's lives have been constrained by arbitrary deadlines and how learning to live at your own pace can be unexpectedly freeing. We're thrilled that we've been able to put together this incredible two-night event to celebrate the book's launch. We have an all-star lineup of amazing women who will be joining Dory in conversation about many of the topics she writes about, everything from dating to work to infertility. And on top of that, we have some special guests who will be stopping by to give us expert tips on everything from fashion to finances. You should have received an event program with your registration email that details the lineup for each night, but we'll drop a link for it in the chat here as well. This also links to some important things like the Tatcha discount code Katie mentioned and the recipes for the delicious signature cocktails we'll be making each night of the event. One last thing before we get started, and that's a big thank you to our bookselling partner, Book Soup in Los Angeles, for fulfilling all the book orders for tonight's event. And a reminder that all of the bundled tickets include a signed and personalized copy of Thanks for Waiting, and that is the only way to get a signed and personalized copy of the book. So if you're still having regrets that you didn't buy a fully bundled ticket, there's still a chance for you to order one from Book Soup, and we'll drop the link in the chat below. Dory's going to be personalizing and signing books after Tuesday evening's event, and all books will be shipped out from the store directly. Because we're packing so much into this event, there may not be time for Dory to answer questions or comments during the sessions, but my Ballantine colleagues are going to be monitoring the chat during tonight's event, and we'll be picking out a few questions for Dory to answer at the end of the night. So if you have a question, drop it in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, so let's kick off the fun with our first session this evening. I am thrilled to welcome the woman of the hour, Dory Shafrir, alongside a woman who will be familiar to many of you, Forever 35 co-host Kate Spencer. Quickly, as they come on stage, I'll just read brief bios, even though they need no introductions. Dory Shafrir is the author of the memoir Thanks for Waiting, as we all know, and the novel Startup. She is the co-host of the podcast Forever 35 and Matt and Dory's Excellent Adventure, and she lives in LA with her family. Kate Spencer is Dory's friend and her Forever 35 podcast co-host. Kate is also the author of the memoir The Dead Moms Club, published by Seal Press in 2017, and her first novel, In a New York Minute, is going to be published by Grand Central in 2022. So without further ado, Dory and Kate, take it away.
Thank you so much for that intro, Sarah.
Wow. Oh, Dory, your hair looks great.
Oh, why, thank you, Kate. I love yours.
Well, thank you so much. As I told you privately in text message, I just got out of a pond about 90 minutes ago. So this is pond hair. It's pond hair.
Pond hair looks great. It's great on you.
So Dory, we're talking tonight about everything late bloomerdom.
Yes.
That's our assigned topic.
Yes. Is there something else you wanted to talk about?
Yes. World politics. No, this was like our broad conversation topic as like our interaction. You have other more like concise experts coming on, but you and I are just talking about late bloomerdom. And so I've been thinking about what I want to know from you about this. And I guess my first, and I mean, you can all, I guess, ask questions of me, but I'm just going to start this.
Please go for it.
Take it away. Okay.
Yes.
So I wanted to know when you first started affixing the label late bloomer to yourself and what it meant to you. And if this is like a 5-layer question, and if you felt it had negative connotations, and if so, if you feel like you've taken that back.
Okay. So, as I was thinking about this and as I kind of write about in my book, I think I started feeling this from a very young age, which is weird, like in retrospect, because why would I have been so self-conscious about being a late bloomer at like 12 or 13 years old? Like that now that just feels laughably young. But I just remember, and I write about this in the book, I remember being at sleepaway camp and feeling like all the other girls had gotten like a manual on how to be a cool girl and like make out with boys and flirt and just like shave their legs and like do all these things that I was like, what? And I remember that was the first time that I really felt like a late bloomer. We didn't have that same sort of pressure at my elementary school, maybe because it was a K-8 public school and like I'd known everyone there since kindergarten and it just didn't have that same pressures. But at camp, all of a sudden I felt like I was thrown into this like really intense world of girliness that I just didn't feel comfortable in. And I started thinking like, oh no, I'm behind because I haven't French kissed anyone and I'm 13. So that's like the first time that I remember feeling that way. But I would say like in my adult life, I really felt it in my mid 30s. I'd been in a relationship for a few years with someone who I thought I was going to marry. We lived together and then we broke up. And it wasn't like a dramatic breakup or, there's no real reason other than we just kind of drifted apart and it became clear that we just weren't right for each other. And initially I was like, I'm free. And like, well,
and you can read all about that freedom in Thanks for Waiting.
And then, I started feeling kind of like a melancholy and kind of like this feeling of late bloomerdom of like, but not even late bloomer because I didn't feel like I'd really bloomed, just that I was kind of late. And again, feeling like I just like hadn't gotten the memo. And so, I think it took a few years, and I actually think doing the podcast with you has been a big factor in becoming more comfortable in my own skin. So thank you for that.
I mean, listen, this is all about what I've given you. I gave you.
I mean, it can be.
No, but I mean, it's interesting that it's a feeling that starts when you're young. I mean, do you feel like, again, do you feel like you've reclaimed it? Like the connotation with this idea of late blooming, at least how I've always experienced it, right, has been negative, right? Like,
yeah,
oh, they're a late bloomer, they're behind, they're slow to catch up, whatever it is. And what I feel like age has given me is the perspective that it's not a bad thing to come into life experiences later. And I'm curious if you feel like maybe writing this memoir and really kind of evaluating your life this far has led you to change your perspective on what it means to be a late bloomer.
For sure. It definitely has. I mean, first of all, I think it made me more kind of more empathic with the younger person I was. And it has made me more like, it has made me feel more like my experiences and like things that I considered mistakes, or, just bad things that happened to me, like they all kind of have come together in the person that I am now. And that is something that has taken me a really long time to feel like at peace with, if that makes sense. Like, I think I used to feel embarrassed or ashamed of some of my experiences, whether it was because I felt like they were late or just what they were. And now I'm like owning it. And so I think that to me is part of the reclaiming of the late bloomer label, of the like, yeah, I'm gonna swear. I hope that's okay.
Do it. Do it.
I'm fucking blooming, okay?
Yes, girl.
Yeah. So like, okay, it happened now. And it didn't happen 10 years ago, and that's okay.
Okay, do you think that this whole concept of the late bloomer and this like timeline that we're pressured to be on, and I'm speaking specifically as a woman in our current society, do you think this is all constructed by the patriarchy anyway, and it's bullshit, and we should just throw out the whole idea of being a late
I mean, I think it's mostly the patriarchy. Yes. I think the patriarchy has had a vested interest in making women think that they need to do everything on a certain timeline. Um, I was having a conversation with someone about this recently, and they said, I think I just want to live in a house like with my best friends and not be in a heterosexual relationship with a man. And that is very threatening to the patriarchy. This idea that like when men feel like we don't need them, like that is very destabilizing to them. And so keeping us on this timeline, I think, is a way of maintaining that power. So like, yeah, a lot of it is because of the patriarchy.
Yeah, there's a New York Times headline today. It might be an op-ed piece. I haven't read it, but it's essentially like women aren't having kids because they have other stuff they want to do. Did you see that?
Yes.
I was like, I mean, and also we live in the most inhospitable culture for people to raise children. That's another Zoom and another book. But I think that is really interesting. This kind of the whole concept of late blooming is in a way a rebellion, right, against what we are expected to do, and a rebellion against conforming, which now having this perspective, it's like, yes, I didn't conform, but when you're in the thick of it, it feels awful being left behind in that way.
Yes. And it feels awful being like, I'm the only one. That's really lonely, that's really lonely and really isolating and really challenging. Like, I think most people, and I include myself in this, like don't have the fortitude to like go against the grain their entire lives. Like that's really tough. Now, what I will say is I do think that things are changing, and I'm heartened by a few things. I think that women have more autonomy over their reproductive choices now in a way that they didn't before, in terms of like being able to freeze their eggs. And I think that a lot of people in their 20s who are able to do this have given themselves a little bit more freedom than we had when we were in our 20s. Egg freezing existed, but like, did you know anyone who froze their eggs when we were in our 20s? Like, I did not. It was not a common thing. It was not talked about. And now I feel like, companies are offering it as a perk. Like it's so just, it's just something that people do now. So like, that's one thing. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is how we have no role models for what a fulfilled life as a single person, as a childless person, as like someone who had not kind of gone against the grain in any way. We had no role models in that regard when we were teens and young adults. Like, who were our pop culture role models? It was like Carrie Bradshaw, you know, like
I'm trying to think of one, and I can't.
there weren't, because the people making the pop culture, Dolly Parton is married. Someone just put in the chat.
But doesn't have a child, but is childless.
Yes, is childless, and she has an unconventional marriage. But
and she has an amusement park, Dory.
And she has an amusement park. That is true. I'll say there were very few who seemed happy and fulfilled, especially on TV and in movies. I mean, older single women were portrayed as like sad. And
well, like it was like Murphy Brown, and then Ellen was single on her show, but she was forced to be heterosexual for the most part on her sitcom. Like,
yeah.
And remember the takedown of Murphy Brown not having a child out of wedlock? Oh, someone did say Oprah, and yes, I mean, truly, Oprah is an icon in this way, never marrying Stedman. I do feel like she has, and that's what I think makes Oprah so special. She does her shit the way she wants to.
Yes. I shouldn't say there were none. There were not many. And I think that now people in their 20s have more role models when it comes to that stuff. And I'm hopeful that, for the generation behind us, this will not even be questioned. Like, they will be able to create the lives that they want to create, without feeling bad about it.
Well, I don't know. Olivia Rodrigo has a line in her new song Brutal where she laments the fact that she can't parallel park, and it just is this moment. She's like basically complaining and feeling really shitty about herself in this song. I almost feel like it's touching on what you're talking about. It's almost like a new 18-year-old version of just like, she just feels completely out of place and left behind. I don't know if the cycle continues or if the cycle breaks, Dory.
Gosh, I'm hopeful that it breaks. I already see the attitudes and perspectives of people in their teens and 20s. They're so different from the way ours were when we were that age, that I am hopeful that things are changing. So that's all I can say about that. I'm hopeful. I remain hopeful.
Okay, good. Someone actually just asked a question. This is great. What advice do you give to late bloomers in their love life for women who don't see their worth and keep selecting men or women or non-binary people who are not good for them, critique them, can't commit? Do you see this question?
I think
it's a question in the chat. It might have been supposed to say for later, but I'm just curious about it.
I think that therapy really helped with this. And I would recommend therapy for anyone who is who sees these patterns in themselves, because I think anytime you see patterns that you think are in some way self-destructive or self-sabotaging, it's really important to interrogate those patterns and figure out why they're happening and how you can break them. So, I know if you listen to the podcast, Kate and I recommend therapy for like pretty much everything, but like, I really think in this case, like, this is a super hard pattern to break, because guys like these like emotionally unavailable guys, they're addictive, and it's really hard to break your addiction to them. So I really suggest seeking professional help with this.
Yeah, I once had a boyfriend tell me he didn't think he had emotions. And that turned me on even more, Dory. I just stuck with it. Like, I'll fix you. It didn't work.
Maya Angelou quote, when people tell you who they are, believe them.
Yes.
And like, that to me in dating, like, people should have that in like neon lights in their bedrooms. That should be, when you are dating, that should be the first thing that you think about all the time. And I'm going to talk about dating later with Logan Yuri, but yeah, I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times when it was like, oh, this person is like very clearly telling me what they're about, and I am choosing to ignore it.
You're all in.
I'm all in, or I think I can change it, or there's so many stories that we tell ourselves, but I think this idea that like people really do tell you who they are for the most part. Someone once said to me, like, a kind of modification of that was, people usually tell you who they are within the first 10 minutes, which is like, that goes against some of my ideas of like wanting to give people a chance and etc. But like, I do think there is something to I guess what I'm saying is like paying attention to those signs that people are giving you is important.
Can I ask you a question? How do you, like, it's so wonderful, this idea of coming into yourself and owning where you are in life, no matter how it's viewed. But it's another thing to have to go out into the world and answer questions from your parents or your friends, or field the comments about where you are in life or why aren't you in a relationship. Or what are some ways, and maybe this is, like gray rocking or something, but like, how do you suggest people handle the kind of nonsense that gets thrown to anyone who isn't living life by like the perceived standards?
I mean, I'm a big fan of shutting down the conversation and saying, something to the effect of, I'm really happy with my life. Like, thank you for asking. I'm really happy with my life. And then just like leaving it there. You don't owe these people anything, even if they're your parents. If you've made choices that you are confident in, just shut it down. And also, honestly, if you've made choices that you're not confident in, like if you do want to have a kid and it just hasn't happened yet and people are like badgering you about it, shut it down. Put that shit down. Like, you do not need to have that conversation. So I am a big fan of just like feeling like you don't have to answer every question. Just because someone asks doesn't mean you owe them a response.
It's very hard for us people pleasers out there to handle that.
It is hard, even for someone like me who like loves a boundary. It can be hard, and like sometimes it takes you by surprise. Like,
yes, you're like at the grocery store.
Yeah, when you're like not expecting it. And I find it actually harder to shut it down when it's coming from a total stranger for some reason.
Yes.
Like, I was talking to some woman at the playground a few weeks ago, and she was just like, so do you think you'll have a second kid? Our kids were like around the same age. And I was just kind of like, oh, this is not a conversation that I want to be having right now. But like, I just met this woman. She seems totally nice. And like, and I was just kind of like, oh yeah, I don't know. Thinking about it. But like, am I going to go into my whole like, well, we've done IVF? And like, it's just like,
yeah.
I guess if you're the person who's thinking about asking the question, just don't ask that question.
Well, it's so hard too. It's like sometimes we try to make chit chat, and all of a sudden we're asking like the most personal questions.
Yes.
Out of like forced conversation.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And sometimes the conversation goes somewhere where we're suddenly like, whoa, let's reel this in.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's something I can work on. I think a boundary is a good. I think that's a good practice that you are suggesting. But it is so hard to move through the world and find space for your own, like loving your own blooming, while while managing the people who may not understand it or understand the choices that you make.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And I think it takes a kind of self-confidence and a sort of self-possession that isn't always easy to have, especially if you are constantly feeling attacked about your choices. So I acknowledge that it is not always so easy.
So when you were writing this book, did you have a vision for what you wanted readers to get out of it as you were kind of telling these stories and shaping the structure and deciding what you were going to share and what you were withholding? What is kind of your, as you leave it now, as it goes out into the world, what do you want people to take away from it?
I want people to be able to see something of themselves in it, even if we are very different people and have had different experiences. I think that the themes that I speak to are themes that a lot of people will be able to relate to. And I hope it brings some people some peace about, the direction that their lives have gone in and the choices that they've made and the experiences that they've had. And, I hope that it also shows people that, like, you can change, you can do work on yourself, and you can learn things about yourself, and you can kind of come out the other side of it. And that can happen. So, I hope that people reading this end up feeling that way.
Well, I felt that way, even though I feel like we've had very different life trajectories. I mean, the idea of being a late bloomer it's truly how one experiences it, right? Like, I've felt that way many times in my life, even though you and I have had very different lives. So I do feel like it resonated with me. And also it's illuminating in a way where I feel like, and I don't know if you did this on purpose, but it's really helpful knowing not everything is what it seems.
Yes.
Okay. Does that make sense? Which I got a lot from your book, and perhaps it's because I know you. Mm-hmm. One would say, I know you very well. Mm-hmm. But I do think this idea, like, as you were talking about the girls at camp who knew how to make out and knew how to, like, put on mascara, I'm wondering what they were feeling in those moments, and if they felt like they had it together, or if they were also like, is this the universal bond that ties us all together? This feeling of not fitting in and of being left behind, and this fear that we are not, quote, there yet. You need to find them and ask them.
I mean, I am Facebook friends with some of them.
Can you read this chapter in my book and tell me what you were feeling when I had to go make out with a boy and you were pressuring me? Ugh.
Yeah. I think I probably won't do that, but it's an interesting thought exercise.
I'll do it for you.
Thank you so much.
I do feel like, though, that is like the universal experience, which is why I feel like I could relate to so much of what you were saying.
Yeah, and I know we have to wrap up, but one thing that you said also really spoke to me, which is, this idea that we don't really know what's ever going on in someone else's life. Like, I've had people who have known me for years be like, I never thought of you as a late bloomer. Like, that's not how I perceive you. And it's just interesting that was always my self-perception, but wasn't necessarily, especially I think people who knew me professionally, that wasn't how they saw me. And so that's been an interesting thing to kind of, like, work through. So I don't know. I feel like I could talk to you about this for a long time.
Luckily we make a podcast, but I believe
it's true.
Our time together has come to an end.
Thank you, Kate.
I mean, thank you for asking me to do this. I'll be lurking in the chat. I have to go put a child to bed, and then I'll be back.
Great.
Thank you so much, guys. That was An incredible conversation, very reassuring and relatable, if I do say so myself. And thank you so much, Kate, for joining us tonight. A reminder that if you have a fully bundled ticket, you'll also be able to catch Kate at tomorrow night's after party also. And now I'm excited for our first interstitial of the evening. The wonderful Emily Ferris of Boozy Bungalow is going to show us how to make tonight's Worth the Wait specialty cocktail, which can also be made as a mocktail if you prefer, the Bloomin' Lemonade. A little bit about Emily. Emily Ferris has been creating content for the internet for nearly 20 years and has written for The Cut, Bon Appetit, Lifehacker, BuzzFeed, and many other publications you've actually heard of. She shares drink recipes and home decor tips on her blog, theboozybungalow.com, and she is currently launching a parenting podcast and working on an essay collection about her late in life ADHD diagnosis. Most often, Emily can be found on Instagram at @EmilyFerris. And so without further ado, here's Emily.
Hello, my name is Emily Ferris. I'm a writer, a crafter, a cocktail maker, a soon-to-be podcaster, and a friend of the pod. Before I had 2 small kids, trying to raise kids in a pandemic and work, I spent a lot of time coming up with new cocktail recipes, and I would share them on my blog, The Boozy Bungalow. It's theboozybungalow.com, and my Instagram account at @EmilyFerris. Now, I haven't done much of that lately because pandemic times, but when Dory asked me to make a drink for her book party, of course, I was like, fuck yes. And then I asked Dory what her favorite drink was, and she couldn't quite tell me that, but she said she liked drinks that were herbal. And that was very exciting to me because the first cocktail I ever made before I became a person who makes cocktails was a basil mint whiskey lemonade. And I totally came up with the idea after getting this like cute little vintage lemonade set. And this felt like such a perfect drink for Dory's book launch because it has whiskey in it, but it's just as amazing without whiskey. And if you don't like whiskey, you can use vodka or something else, or just leave the alcohol out completely. The only trick to this drink, and it's not even a trick, it's a little bit of work, is that you have to make a syrup ahead of time. And this is a basil mint simple syrup. It's very simple. I think you have some sort of recipe card by now, but to make this syrup, you make a simple syrup, which is 1 part water, 1 part sugar. So I did 1 cup, and then boil it, make sure the sugar's dissolved, add about 1 cup of loosely packed fresh basil and mint leaves, reduce the heat, let it simmer for 15 minutes, then take it off the heat, let it sit another 30 minutes and strain it. Your house will smell amazing. It smells like summer. It's amazing. You strain the herbs out, put it in an adorable little airtight container, chill it overnight, or until you're ready to make your drink. It will keep for a couple of weeks. So when you're ready to make this drink, this is where it gets very easy. Obviously, you start with a cocktail glass. An alternative is a mason jar that you can also use as a shaker, but you don't need to shake it. I have pre-measured everything so I don't spill something on myself and embarrass myself in this video. So for this drink, and I realized when I was measuring this out, this is a giant drink, so you can make it and share it with someone or just have a giant drink. It starts with 1/2 cup of lemon juice. Now, generally, I say you have to squeeze your own lemons or citrus for a cocktail. It's so much better. But if you don't want to do that, because it is kind of a drag, this Santa Cruz lemon juice is like the best alternative to fresh citrus juice. So you can use 1/2 cup of fresh squeezed lemon juice or Santa Cruz or a really good lemon juice. That might be backwards for you. Okay, then this is a giant drink. 1/4 cup of our fancy herbal syrup. Again, I pre-measured everything. Giant drink. And then 2 ounces of whiskey, if you like whiskey. You could use less. You could use more. It's already a giant drink. Or you could use none. You could use vodka, whatever. Okay, so then you just give it a stir. Now, the reason I said, that's probably very loud for you. The reason I suggested a mason jar as an alternative is because technically in drinks that have citrus in them, you're supposed to shake them instead of stir them, but it doesn't really matter. It all works. But you could shake it and serve it, make it, shake it, serve it in the mason jar. And that's very like summery and southern. But just make sure everything is well mixed. Clink, clink, clink. You can use a pretty gold bar spoon from Target if you'd like. Then you add ice, and if you're like me and you're ridiculous and have clear ice delivered, you could put in a giant clear ice cube into your giant drink. And then, because I like things to be sparkling and bubbly and refreshing, top it off with some club soda. Nice and bubbly, give you a better view there. Give it another quick stir. This is a giant drink. You could cut this in half. Eat it, whatever, it works. Now for garnish, you can skip the garnish completely. You can garnish it with a lemon wheel, like that. I also, not to sound pretentious, but a garnish really adds to the experience of a drink. And that's because we also smell, we taste with our noses, not really. Smell is a part of taste. And because this syrup has an herbal infusion, by adding some fresh herbs, it really enhances the experience and makes the whole drink feel more herbal, like Dory would like, and summery. And then you drink this whole thing and you're gonna have to pee all day, but that's okay. Delicious, refreshing, herbal, summery. Yeah, that's it. If you want more drinks, check out theboozybungalow.com. Follow me on Instagram at @EmilyFerris. I will also see you back here tomorrow night. Until then, cheers to Dory and thanks for waiting. Bye.
Okay, well, if you haven't tried this, I highly recommend it. It is delicious. And in the next session, Dory is going to be in conversation with the brilliant Logan Ury all about dating. And so while I bring them up here, I am just going to introduce Logan. Behavioral scientist turned dating coach, Logan Ury is the author of the new book, How to Not Die Alone. As the director of relationship science at the dating app Hinge, Logan leads a research team dedicated to helping people find love. After studying psychology at Harvard, she ran Google's behavioral science team, the Irrational Lab. She was a 2018 TED resident and a featured speaker at South by Southwest 2021. Logan lives in the Bay Area with her husband, Scott. Take it away, Dory and Logan.
Yay, so nice to be here.
Thanks for coming, Logan.
Yeah, all right, Dory, you're about 40 minutes into this. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good because I now have my drink. My
Great
basil
answer.
mint lemonade drink.
There we
all ready
go.
to go. And I was just telling the people in the Zoom chat that as Emily was doing her little demonstration, I was like, oh, this needs more whiskey. So I got up and added more whiskey. So,
Good.
really anything could happen now.
Great. Okay, well, liquid courage to talk about all things dating.
Indeed.
Great. Well, I've heard all about your dating history and sort of how the late bloomer element of your life manifested in dating. But I'd love to just hear and have you tell everyone listening right now a little bit about what dating was like for you before you met your husband.
Yeah. So I had my first kind of serious relationship at the very end of college. I was almost 22, and we were together for like 2.5 years, I think. And then after that, I was kind of a serial monogamist for quite some time until my early 30s. And I dated someone for almost 4 years who I lived with and thought I was going to get married to. And then when we broke up, I kind of had I've referred to it as a Rumspringa. I had this, kind of dating awakening that I probably should have had in college or like in my early 20s, but I just never had. And so I really started like dating, and I dated a couple of people who I worked with very ill-fatedly. One much more ill-fatedly than the other, but both were not wise ideas at all.
We've all been there.
I know. And it's funny because whenever I bring this up, like someone inevitably is like, well, I met my partner who I've been married to for, 15 years at work. And it's like, yes, those examples do exist. For me personally, this has never worked out well. I did that. I did a lot of online dating. This was pre-Hinge, so it was mostly OkCupid. There was also briefly a site called How About We. I don't know if you are familiar
Yeah, I
with it.
remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. So their whole premise was like you would suggest dates, like how about we go to a museum or whatever.
Yeah.
So I was on that site. I was on a site called Coffee Meets Bagel, which I think still exists. Question
Yep.
mark.
Yeah, it does.
And yeah, so I really kind of threw myself into online dating, with varying results for quite some time. And then I moved to LA, and my move to LA coincided pretty much exactly with the founding of Tinder. So when Tinder first started, it was really, they originally targeted it to people in college. So it was mostly very young people. Like when my friend first told me about it, she was like, okay, everyone on there is very young, but like it's still kind of fun. And because we were, by that point I was in my mid 30s, and it did seem like everyone on there was like 22, but there would occasionally be the odd 30-year-old in there. And then I met my husband on Tinder. But one thing that I talk about in the book is that I had this sort of revelation about dating that, again, for me, I felt like I needed to kind of do a quantity over quality, but like I needed to kind of date as much as I could. I felt like I needed dating experience. And so in that year that I moved to LA, I ended up going out with, I once calculated, I think it was like 35 people. Which
That's amazing.
yeah, it's a lot.
Did you have a spreadsheet? Were you tracking it?
Spreadsheet, but I remember going out to dinner with a friend who was kind of talking about her dating life and how she was really struggling. And I asked her how many dates she had gone on recently. She was like, one. She was like, I hate online dating. And I was like, well, I don't love it, but I go on a lot of dates. And then she was like, how many dates have you gone on? And I kind of calculated, and I was like, I don't know, like 35 people in the last year. And like some of them I only went out with once, some of them I went out with a couple times, a couple of them I saw a few times. But the thing that I think really helped me there was that it lowered the stakes for each individual date. So instead of meeting up with someone and being like, okay, this is probably going to be the person I'm going to marry, and like putting all that pressure on myself, it just was like another date. And I could kind of relax and be myself and just go on another date. And then what happened was I started being less obsessed with like, does this person like me? And more about, do I like this person? Which was a really important kind of mental shift that I didn't even know I needed to make. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, I love that. I mean, you answered a lot of my questions, which are things like, did you do online dating and what was that journey like for you? But one thing you mentioned that I'd like to go back to, because this is an area that I'm super interested in. I've done a lot of research on breakups. You talked about having this 5-year long intense relationship that you ended. So can you walk us through the decision-making process of saying this isn't the right relationship for me, and tell us what that was like?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I think that in some ways, breakups that have a kind of like precipitating event are much easier, right? Because you have, oh, this person cheated on me. Something big that happens, and it's sort of like obvious that you need to break up. It might still be emotionally very wrenching, but the knowledge that you need to break up is like right there. With my ex-boyfriend, who is John in the book, nothing was ever like super obvious. Like everything was fine. Nothing was bad. Nothing was great, but like nothing was like really bad. He was a very nice guy, a good person. Like I liked his family, but we had started talking about getting married, and he kept being like, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. And I was like, well, when are you going to be ready? Like, what, and like, what is the holdup? And he was kind of like, I don't know, like, I need to feel more settled in my career. And, he kind of had these like vague responses. And I was sort of, for a while, I was kind of content to just like wait. Like, I didn't really feel like I was in that much of a rush. And then, like, all of a sudden, I was like, wait a second, like, why am I just kind of waiting for this guy to like suddenly make up his mind that he wants to marry me? Like, don't I deserve someone who is like super excited about marrying me, not someone who like has finally like come to the decision that he's like okay with marrying me? And so that, I started thinking about that, and I was kind of like, that makes me feel shitty, that I'm like still with this person. And we started like just drifting apart. Like, we spent less and less time together. We weren't hanging out. Like, he would go out with his friends, I would go out with my friends. And then we did go on this one trip, excuse me, over Memorial Day weekend with another couple. And it was like not a fun trip. Like, we didn't fight really, but I was just like, I don't like really being around this person. So, but we had been together for almost 4 years at that point, and I was scared to just like fully break up with him. So I said to him, how about we, like, I think we should break up for the summer, like give ourselves the summer to kind of like think about things. Even though I think I knew in the back of my mind that like we were just breaking up, like we were just breaking it for the summer. But I moved out, I got a sublet, and I think that gave me like the clarity of mind to be like, okay, this relationship is not serving me. And so we just like officially broke up. But it was definitely like, it felt like a long, slow breakup in a way that in retrospect, like, I should have just ripped the band-aid off. But it's hard to know that in the moment, So I also want to like have empathy for the person I
Yeah.
was who like couldn't bring myself to break up.
I mean, I think it was very brave. You talk a lot about the pressure that women face around this idea of a dating expiration date, or, expiration dating. And so how did it
Mm-hmm.
feel when, I believe you were 32 and you ended this relationship? Like, what did society say to you? What did your friends and family say? Was there a sense of, it didn't work out for me now, like maybe it'll never happen to me?
Yeah, I had just turned 33 actually, and a good friend of mine who was like 5 years younger, um, had just gotten married. Like, that was the last event that my ex and I had gone to together, was this wedding. Um, and I remembered like she and I were close, and before she had gotten engaged, we had always talked about, because it seemed like we were kind of on a similar timeline, but then it turned out we weren't at all. Like, she got married and I did not get married. And so I think I was just kind of like, oh, okay, like that's not happening to me, for me, in the way that I thought it was going to. And my initial reaction to that was to like just get really drunk and like hook up with people. Um, I
Yeah.
I didn't have a plan. I was just like, I think that was my coping mechanism. Like, this thing that I had been so sure of in my life, just, it wasn't going to happen. And what was it? How was I going to move forward? I wasn't sure at first.
What about the story of meeting your husband? Tell us about that. I mean, I think everything you said around like, if you show up interviewing somebody for a spouse, it's not going to work. Like, what was your mindset like? Why did it connect? Why was this the one when it really worked?
Yeah. So, I think that I had gone out with so many people by the time I met my husband, and most of them were fine. Like, they were mediocre to fine. A lot of people that I didn't really have a spark with, but no one who I was like, oh my God, that person's a monster. Um, and so then when I met my husband, we did have this spark, like pretty much right away. We talked on the phone before we met in person. And we had this like really long conversation, like one of those like high school, almost falling asleep on the phone kind of conversations. And I was like, wow, I haven't talked to someone like this in a really long time. And then when we went out, it just felt easy. And he felt different. He just felt different from everyone else. He was kind and funny and handsome and smart, and we just got along really well, like right away. And yeah, and so, but we did, we did meet on Tinder. It turned out that we had a lot of mutual friends, and he lived like down the street from me, so it wasn't like he was a total stranger. But we did meet on Tinder.
I love that. I mean, I think it just shows that sometimes, things happen to you when they happen. Like maybe when you were a different age, you might think like by the time I'm 30, I will have met the person I'm dating, but things just take time. And I feel like that's such a good theme of your book. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, the advice that you would give yourself at 15 and 25 and 35, because you're really somebody who I think has had many great things happen to them, but maybe not on the official timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say to my 15-year-old self, I would say it's gonna be okay. And you're going to, in high school, I was so confused and like, would be friends with one group of people and then be friends with another group of people, and didn't really have a strong sense of self, I think. And I think I would want to tell that person that like who you are is enough. Like you don't have to pretend to be this other person. And when it comes to dating, like don't worry about it. Like just don't worry about it. And I think a similar theme for at 25 and 35, like be confident in who you are. Like who you are is enough. You don't have to become a different person, especially when it comes to dating. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the book is feeling like sometimes I would date these guys and feel like I had to kind of adapt myself to their personalities or their lifestyles or whatever it was. And it wasn't me. It was this person that I thought they wanted me to be. But that might not have been true either. Like they might have just liked me, but instead I was kind of contorting myself to become this other person. And I wish I hadn't had to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us go through that phase of who does this person want me to be and do they like me, as opposed to I like them. And I think that's such an important phase that people get to with dating, where they say, who cares if this person called me back? I don't want to see them again, or I don't like the side of me that they bring out, even if they're good on paper. And so that really feels like a huge milestone that sometimes people never even get to.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, for me at least, that goes back to having this experience dating a lot of people, because I was able to, when the stakes felt lower, I was able to say to myself, okay, like I actually don't really like this person, and I don't care if they like me. Whereas I think in the past, sometimes if someone really liked me, like that was enough.
Right.
And then the opposite too, of like feeling like, well, I just really want this person to like me. And kind of doing anything in my power to like make them like me, quote unquote, which like never works out well. So yeah, I think that's, but I think it's really easy for me now to talk about that in retrospect, but I think at the time it was a really hard thing for me to actually do, and took a while for me to do. So I know that there are probably a lot of people watching this who are either dating or going through breakups, and I don't want them to get the impression that I'm saying that like this should be easy for them, because I know it's not.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I lost you for a second, but yeah, I completely agree. And so, one thing that I've heard you say, and that I'm sure you talk about in the book, is this idea of kind of blowing up the dating rules. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that means to you, but then also what do you think is the most harmful piece of dating advice that you've heard? And what's the best piece of dating advice that you've heard?
Oh, well, I think that one of one of the rules, which I think is actually, I never read it, but I think it's actually in the rules, the book,
Yeah.
is like for women, you should never be the pursuer. You should always be
Mhm.
pursued.
Yeah.
And like that message is just so harmful, I think. And like, you know, I internalized that message for a long time. Um, and I wish that when I was in my 20s and 30s, that the rules had not been so, you know, so present in the zeitgeist. Even though we all kind of like rolled our eyes at them, I think that
Yeah.
we kind
People
of
definitely internalize them for
we
sure.
internalize them. Yeah, we
Mhm.
internalize those messages. And same thing with like, things like he's just not that into you.
Oh,
Like those are, I think, ultimately like pretty harmful messages.
yeah. At this
Um,
point, I basically feel like any book that's giving gender dating advice is pretty outdated because all the
yes.
things that apply to dating are things like be a kind, compassionate person, use consent, be honest, tell people what you're looking for, tell people what you're not looking for. I don't think it needs to be like, hey, ladies, sleep with him on
Right.
the third date. It's like any of that stuff just feels so dated to me. And I think
Yes.
besides fertility, which of course, is a real thing, and of course is one of your big topics, I think a lot of dating advice at this point is should be relevant to everyone because we're all just putting
Yeah.
ourselves out there trying to do our best.
Yes. Yes. I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I'm hopeful that, you know, in this next younger generation that attitude has started to shift. I think even
Yeah.
something like Bumble where, the female identified person has to reach out first, like I think even something like that is like a really important cultural shift because women have been told by so much messaging that
Yeah.
that is just not something that we women do. I'm like, oh.
I totally agree. And,
So
we just did
harmful.
this really interesting research project at Hinge looking at dating burnout because dating burnout,
Mm,
feeling emotionally exhausted about dating is very common, especially end of pandemic. It's just been such a hard 18 months for people. And um,
yeah.
the general advice to avoid dating burnout is take a break. You should go on fewer dates, really step back. But what we found was actually what's negatively correlated with dating burnout is feeling in control. And so if you actually go after what you want, which is sending somebody a like or a comment if you're interested in them, that makes you feel more in control and then you feel
Mm,
less burned out. And so a lot of it is just about kind of going after what you want. And so I really like that attitude of not only will, as a woman who likes men, not only is that something that won't backfire, it's actually a good mental health strategy for avoiding dating burnout.
yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. I love that research. I will say
Yeah.
though that right before I met Matt, and I know we have to wrap up, but
Yeah.
I had gone on a little dating hiatus
Hmm.
for a few weeks because I was feeling that dating burnout, and I did feel like I just need a break. I just need a break from all of this, and I did come back kind of like refreshed. But I think that I did what you're saying. Like I at that point I was very clear that I wanted a long-term relationship, and I really like put that out there. And I think that really helped in terms of weeding out people who were not looking for the same thing I was looking for.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, it's so great to follow along with your journey. And I love, there's so many Matt fans on here, and it's just great to really hear someone who uh, took their own path, did not feel pressured about the time, and has wound up in an amazing place where your book is coming out
Oh,
tomorrow.
thank you, Logan. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
doing this.
Yeah, it's such an honor to be here, and congratulations, and soak it all in tomorrow. It's going to go by quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. That was great. Thank you, Logan, so much. And now we're going to switch topics. And our second interstitial tonight is featuring financial expert Tanya Rapley. A bit about Tanya. She is an internationally recognized speaker, financial educator, best-selling author, and a serial entrepreneur based in Atlanta. She is founder of the award-winning site My Fab Finance, where her mission is to help people make financial decisions they are proud of so they can create the lives they love. Furthering her commitment to holistic wellness, in 2019, she purchased Club Loofah, an inclusive self-care brand focused on inspiring and supporting regenerative practices for all. So here is Tanya.
Hello, my name is Tanya Rapley, and I am the founder of My Fab Finance. And first, I want to congratulate Dory on this important book that is timely, and as someone who has found herself aging more than I actually realized, I think this is an important reminder that we all show up at different places in our lives. We all show up on the journey differently, and our journeys look different. We can't impose false milestones on what we should do, who we should be, or what we should know by certain ages, because we all have different backgrounds. And a little background about me: I'm a financial educator. I've been a financial educator since 2014. I was my own first student when it came to personal finance. And I came to personal finance because I realized that there was a lot that I didn't know when it came to money. I just knew the basics, pay people back on time. But when it came to my savings habits, when it came to my investing habits, they just weren't there because I didn't realize how important they were in my younger years. But I also feel like my younger years lent to learning, lent to living, lent to a lot of the things that I feel like are important, and that created space for me to appreciate where I am in my journey today. And I hope that anyone watching this is able to reflect on the beauty of their younger years or their previous years and how that has lent to where you are today, the valuable lessons that you have learned. And I don't look at any of it as a waste. Now, while I might have wasted a lot of money, I don't look at it as a waste. And so I got into personal finance for that reason. I wanted to do money better. I felt like I'd worked really hard and I wasn't seeing the impact or the benefit of that hard work. And so I wanted to make sure that money would be something that I didn't have to worry about, and money wouldn't be a barrier to me experiencing the convenient life that I desired, because I am all about convenience. So I wanted to talk quickly about finance, being that I'm a finance expert, and especially, beginning, I talked about false milestones, but everyone has different starting places. And just because someone starts further down the line or someone starts a little further behind, it doesn't mean that they should have things accomplished or should have it all figured out, because the truth is we don't exactly get a rule book on how to do this thing called life. When it comes to money, it's so nuanced, it's so layered, it's so intertwined into our emotional experience that often affects how we relate to money and how we make decisions related to our money. And so when we think about false milestones telling you should do this by this point, you should have this by that, you should have bought this by that, you should pay this off by that, it's similar to what we tell people about their careers, their childhood or their mental development, their relationships that they have, whether they should be married or whether they should have kids, and all those other things. It's important for us to realize that people are on the timelines that are meant for them. People are on the timelines that are beneficial for them, and people are on the timelines where they will learn what they're supposed to learn. And I think about the financial decisions that I made when I was younger. I was doing that because I needed to learn how to be compassionate to other people who were making those same choices. I've walked in those shoes. And I hope that if you're watching this, maybe it doesn't relate to your financial experience, or maybe it relates to your life experience. Maybe you can think about a time where you were making some of the same decisions as someone else's, and it allows you to be a little bit more compassionate, because that's what we need more about in this world. We need more compassionate. We need more compassion. We need more compassion for ourselves. So we need more compassion for ourselves. We need more compassion for others. And we need to exercise empathy and grace, because empathy and grace are also extremely important, not just in life, but especially when it comes to our finances. A lot of us are making decisions with information that we don't quite frankly have. And then we're judging ourselves for that information that we did not have. We have to look at it that way. But when it comes to your finances, you also want to acknowledge how beneficial money can be. Having money isn't everything, but having money gives you options. And those options are powerful. It gives you the option to do things that you want to do and choose not to do things that you don't want to do. It also allows you to be an inspiration to others and a benefit to others. When you can give freely, you can give freely of your time, you can give freely of your resources, because not only do you know that you have enough, but you know that there's more than where that came from. A lot of the work that I do as a financial educator is mindset work. I do mindset work on myself. There's breakthroughs, things that I have to navigate and beliefs that I have to break through, but I often find that with my clients. And one of the easiest ways to address your mindset or a negative mindset that you might have around money is just to start trying, just to start doing. A lot of people don't realize that when you start trying or when you start doing, you start to build up that confidence muscle. And as you build up that confidence muscle, you're able to take you're able to take more chances when it comes to your money. You're able to confidently believe in yourself and believe in your decision making ability, but you also have less fear, because when you've taken chances and you've bet on yourself and it worked out in your favor, or you knew that at the end of the day it wasn't the end of the world, that you had an opportunity to start over or try again, it makes you more willing to take more chances. And this world is built by people who are willing to take chances. The willingness to take chances will inspire our children. It inspires our parents. It inspires our friends. And when we think about money, those who take chances are also rewarded. Now, there are people who take uncalculated chances, and you really want to make sure that you're examining all options available to you and looking at different potential outcomes, but not allowing that research period to stop you from taking action, not allowing that research period to stop you from saving, not allowing that research period to stop you from investing, not allowing that research period to prevent you from taking steps towards a financial future that you think is best for you. Whether that is starting your own business and being an entrepreneur, whether that is working for someone else, whether that is going for that career opportunity, whether it's going back to school so you can further yourself in your career, or whether it's transitioning to a completely different career. These are all risks that you take, but I'll tell you what else is a risk. What else is a risk is being complacent. A risk is not being the best that you can be financially. A risk is choosing not to invest in yourself or invest in other vehicles that allow you to experience life on your terms. Choosing not to allow your money to grow. And one of the biggest financial mistakes that I personally feel that I made in my 20s, and when I was not investing in my future, and believing that going to college was enough to invest in myself. Going to college was not enough to invest in myself. Yes, college was an amazing experience, but learning happens outside of the classroom. Your life is a series of learning opportunities, and you also want to make sure you're investing financially. So taking advantage of compound interest. If you have a 401k at work that you contribute to, congratulations, you're an investor. If cryptocurrency confuses you, it's okay. It confuses me too. But there are still sure ways that you can invest and grow your money and take advantage of market opportunities and take advantage of time proven stability that will allow you to grow your money, so that eventually when you're tired of working or you just want to have the option of not working, you have money there for you. You have passive revenue streams available to you. You have assets there that will support you in making whatever financial decision you make. A lot of people ask me as a financial educator, what should they be focusing on? And the first thing that you should be focusing on when it comes to your finances is stability. You can't make decisions from a place of desperation. It's very hard to make good decisions from a place of desperation or from a place of exhaustion or from a place of confusion. And a lot of that comes from instability. So I would say the first thing you want to focus on is ensuring that you have financial stability. Then after that, you want to build on that and make sure that you have an understanding of the financial basics. Understanding, what role does debt play? What role does credit play? What is my credit score? How do I boost my credit score? Do I have a savings put aside? And then once you have a decent understanding of those financial basics, then start investing, start growing your money, start finding ways that your money can work for you so that you don't have to work as hard for it. Sometimes you can do a few of these things at the same time, but I'll tell you what makes it a lot easier, and that's earning as much money as you possibly can. Don't allow anyone to make you feel guilty about earning as much money as you possibly can, because your financial goals become that much easier to achieve when you are earning the money that you deserve. And you deserve to earn everything that you desire and more. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because it makes the journey a lot easier. And lastly, I just want to talk about the importance of financial health, but not just financial health, the role that financial health plays in your overall health, because it can reduce your stress. It allows you to access certain medical treatments. It allows you to do things that people who might be financially stressed or stretched aren't able to do. So in seeking financial security, don't just seek it for yourself, seek it for your health, seek it for the health of those who depend on you and those that you love and care about, as well as inspiring them to do things differently in their life and to be able to own their financial power too. Thanks for Waiting is such a powerful book, and I'm so excited that so many people will get to read it. Again, I want to congratulate Dory. And if you want to learn more about my financial education philosophy, you can find me at myfabfinance.com, on all social media platforms at myfabfinance, and my personal profile, Tanya, with a O, Tonya .Rapley. Congratulations again, Dory, and I wish you all prosperity. I wish you all abundance, and I wish you financial peace.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Tanya. I agree with Dory. I think we should normalize women saying they want to make money. And now we are going to change course again. And for our very last conversation of the evening, Dory is joined by Elizabeth Holmes for what I know is going to be a meaningful conversation about the realities of infertility. So while I welcome Dory back to the stage with Elizabeth, I'm just going to give you Elizabeth's bio. Elizabeth Holmes is the author of the New York Times bestseller, HRH, So Many Thoughts on Royal Style. She spent more than a decade on staff at the Wall Street Journal covering the business and messaging of fashion. Since leaving the paper in 2017, her work has appeared in a host of national outlets, including the New York Times, In Style, and Elle. Elizabeth is a contributing editor at Town & Country and has gained acclaim for her Webby-honored Instagram stories series, So Many Thoughts. She lives outside of San Francisco with her husband and 3 young children, and you can find her on Instagram at eHolmes. All right, I'll let them take it from here. Thanks so much.
Hey, Dory.
Hi, Elizabeth.
How are you?
Oh,
thank you. I had to put on a headband for you and a pink one because I love the pink in your book. Congratulations. I just want to say, you did it. You did it. You wrote a memoir.
Whew, yeah. There were times when I didn't think it was going to happen, but I did do it. So yes.
I really appreciated how you shared on the episode of Forever 35 about the struggles of writing a book, because it is really hard and there are some real low points, but this is the fun stuff. You get to launch it, you get to release it out into the world, and we all get to enjoy it. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And I am so touched to be here to talk about infertility, because I do feel like it's a big part of my story and certainly a big part of your story. And I remember when I first came across your podcast and I was like, oh my gosh, she's sharing in real time. So much of the infertility world is not talked about, not spoken about. I know for me, I have talked about it occasionally, but it was only sort of very much after the fact when I had a baby, and I felt like I could open this part of my life up. And so I was just so struck, and I have chills right now, by the fact that you guys were brave enough to just share everything, it felt like. And I just want to say thank you, because I know that must have been so hard, but it also must have been so helpful to so many people. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. I would love to start by asking you to just sort of recap your infertility journey for us. I feel like this is a world of stats a lot of times, and it's like, I'd like to hear it from you. Talk about, your journey a little bit.
Yeah. So my husband and I got married in October 2015. And we had been kind of trying to get pregnant before the wedding. And we had kind of joked about, oh, be so funny to be pregnant at the wedding. And then that, of course, did not happen. And then we were trying for a few more months, sort of more seriously. I was tracking my ovulation, and, we got pretty down to business, if you will, and still nothing happened. And my OB had said, you know, because of your age, I was 38 at the time. She said, you can try for 6 months before you see a reproductive endocrinologist instead of the year that they normally recommend for people. And so we went to see an RE. And once you kind of, and I don't know if you had this experience too, but for me, it felt like the second I stepped into that reproductive endocrinologist office, I stepped onto like this speeding train that I could not stop. Like once you kind of like set the whole infertility machinery in motion, like
Yes.
you are on that train. And, you know, I was suddenly like thrust into this world of unfamiliar acronyms for one thing.
So many acronyms.
And like code words. Then also, you know, things about my own body that I was not aware of, all these tests. You know, one of the first things that I had to do was an HSG test, which is when they like ink into your fallopian tubes and like make sure that they're clear. And then something that came up on that was that I had a polyp in my uterus. And so that was something that needed to be removed. And so like every step of the way, there was just like another thing, which, you know, I was expecting very naively, I fully acknowledge. I was expecting like you walk into the RE's office, they're like, okay, here's your treatment plan. And then like 2 months later, you're pregnant. And like,
yes. If only, right? I know. I know.
Maybe it happens for like 3 people, but like I think for most of us, like that it just doesn't happen that way. And so we ended up doing 5 egg retrievals. We did 4 transfers. I had 2 surgeries. I had the polyp removal, which I had to like go under general anesthesia for. And then a year into my infertility journey, I found out that I had a uterine septum. So I had to get that repaired. And that was another surgery. And it just like, it just was like one thing after another. And when I finally got pregnant with my son in August 2018, I was in a very low point at that point, because we'd been doing it for over 2 years, and it just felt like every time the goalposts were shifting, and it just felt like we could never catch a break. And I was very pessimistic about the outcome. And then we did get pregnant, and you know, I do have a 2-year-old son now, so it did finally work.
Yeah, no, I mean, reading your journey again in your book, again, I was so struck by your choices and what you shared, because if you're thinking about being a late bloomer, which I very much relate to this on a number of levels, especially career-wise, but with infertility, there is a real clock, right? Like there is a real,
yes,
nature is pretty cruel in that sense, right? There are all these stats that say, you know, like once you hit 35 and your fertility diminishes and things like that. And so it's not something you can just ignore, right? It's not something you can take as much time as you want with. And it's also not something that you can control. I mean, I'm like one of those, like, if I work hard enough, like I'll get it. And it's like, no, like that is not how this works. And so I do think that there is tremendous help when you're feeling, you know, out of control and at the mercy of these doctors and, you know, feeling very down. I did many times to hear other people's stories. So I want to talk about your decision to share. I loved understanding that it was Matt who shared first, right? That you were inspired by his sharing. And, you know, you said, well, maybe we should start a podcast, but I'm curious, how did it feel to have him share? Like, what was that like for you at the beginning, like before you started talking about it?
So, you know, I think when we first started doing IVF, we were told that our kind of like primary issue was that was male factor. So Matt had low sperm count, and the doctors kind of implied like, oh, you know, this is like pretty easily surmountable and like you're fine, like yeah, you're older, quote unquote, but like you look fine, everything's fine. And so that was how I'd kind of gone into it. But I also felt, I wanted to kind of like protect Matt. I didn't know how he would kind of feel about me talking about his diagnosis. And then I also did feel this kind of like sense of, oh, I'm just a cliche, like I'm this woman in my late 30s, like doing IVF. And I was like, I don't know, I was very like mindful of that in a way that in retrospect, like I just shouldn't have been. But I think I had internalized a lot of messaging about our our fertility and what it meant to be a childless woman, and just all this stuff that I now realize was the patriarchy, just to bring it back to the patriarchy.
Always, yes.
Yeah. And then excuse me, Matt did ask if it was okay for him to talk about on a podcast. And I said, because my husband is also a podcaster, and I said, yes, that's fine. Like, I don't think I want to talk about it quite yet, but if you want to talk about it, like, that's okay. And so he talked about it on the podcast, and then he was talking about it at his poker game. And I remember he came home from his poker game and he said, oh, 3 of the guys at my game, like they either are doing IVF right now or they went through IVF to like have their kids. And I was like, wow, like that seems like a very high percentage.
Yeah.
But he was also like, this had never come up until I brought it up. And then that just like had opened up the floodgates. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. And then I noticed like people tweeting at him after he talked about it on the podcast. And there was a lot of men being like, hey, like, thanks for bringing this up. Like, I don't have anyone to talk to about this. It's really hard to talk about. And I was just like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I don't feel comfortable talking about it, but I felt like if I wanted to talk about it, I kind of like knew where I could go. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
and like,
yeah. Because women talk about it definitely more than men.
Women do talk about it, but like I was like, oh, I guess there really is like nowhere for men to go. And then I was like, well, maybe I will. So I tweeted about it a couple times, and the response that I got was like really overwhelming. And I got, a lot of people who were relating to what I was saying. And I was like, you know what? I'm not like, you are a podcaster, like maybe we should just be talking about this like on a podcast. And he was initially like, what are you talking about? Like he had time like discussing it, but the thought of like doing a whole podcast devoted to IVF, he was like, no one wants to listen to that. Like, why would they want to listen to us talk about infertility? That's like so awful. And I was like, I really think there is a need for it. Like at the time, there were the IVF podcasts that existed were very like medical. So it was either like doctors talking about it or, people kind of like giving advice, but there was no one podcasting that was talking about it from the patient's perspective, and certainly not in real time. So we were like, all right, we'll do it. First Matt said, I'm going to do a poll on Twitter, and if enough people say that they want this podcast, then we'll do it. And so he asked on Twitter, like, would you listen to a podcast about IVF? And like, I think it was like 80-20 people in favor of it, which is pretty high. So we decided to do it. And, like many things, like I alluded to earlier, we went into this pretty naively, where we started it right before our first embryo transfer. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be so short. Like, this is going to be like a 6-episode podcast because we're going to do this transfer and it's going to work and I'll be pregnant. And like, that's it. And of course it did not work out that way. And it turned into something much, much longer and bigger than we ever could have imagined.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, when you started it and you were thinking about what to share and how much to share, did you guys set any ground rules? Like,
this is what we'll share, or this is off limits, or it was like, we're just going to talk about this?
It was kind of like, we're just going to talk about this. I'm trying to remember examples of things that we didn't want to talk about. I feel like there were some where I was like, I don't really want to talk about this, but like for the most part, I think we mostly just talked about it all. There were definitely times when I was like, oh, like I don't have to talk about my like shitty transfer results on a podcast, to like thousands of people. Like I just want to be sad about it and like not have to process it in public.
Yeah.
But every time that happened, I felt better afterwards because people would reach out and be like, not only like, I'm really sorry this happened to you, but like also this is what happened to me. And like, thank you for talking about it. And that was rewarding in a way that I wasn't expecting. And it did make me feel better. Like, oh, there are people out there who totally get what I'm going through. Like I am not alone in this either. So I think as much as like, I think it made other people not feel as alone, it also made us feel not as alone.
Oh, so, good. Because that moment in the book where you said something like, oh, I don't want to have to share this. Like, I don't want to, and that I was like, oh my God, my heart. And I can imagine that'd be really hard. You're not just like living it yourself, but you have to share with all these people and presumably people like in your life, too. Like, I'm sure the podcast, I don't know, did people come up to you and want to talk about it like in person? Like, were they sharing their stories? Like, how much sort of in-person interaction did you have with listeners?
Not a ton. Like we would occasionally like run into listeners. But it wasn't like everyone just wanted to like spill their guts to us. It was more, something that did come up more was that friends who, and like I didn't expect them to listen to the podcast. Like no one is obligated to listen to our podcast, obviously, but sometimes friends would want an update or, they would want to talk about it. And I would be like, I'm like talked out. Like I can't have like another conversation about the transfer results or the egg retrieval results or like where we're at in the process. Like not to be like, just listen to the podcast, but like, just listen to the podcast kind of like we talk about this so much and like, it's hard for me to constantly like relive this over and over again. So like, please understand that it's not you. It's just that I'm already talking about this and it's already hard to talk about. And like, I don't always want to have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, totally. Did you, then when you were going back to recap it for the book, like, how did you think about what to include?
Yeah, I mean, that was tough because I felt like I was torn between wanting to like really share our story, but also not get like super bogged down in like the arcane medical details of infertility. But then there were also things where I was like, in order to understand like what I went through, like you kind of need to know like what happens during an egg retrieval. You know what I mean? So
if you're not familiar with it, it is kind of weird.
Right. So, but I also didn't want it to feel like I was just, going into all this mind-numbing detail about, IVF. So that was a little bit of a balancing act, I think, like wanting to keep the narrative compelling while also figuring out like exactly how much I should share, assuming that like some people like you and other people who maybe listen to the podcast would be familiar with the world of infertility, but like certainly not every reader is going to be familiar with it. And so I kind of had to assume that people were not familiar with it and kind of go from there. But I felt like I really needed to put in these like particular inflection points in our story. And one thing that, I do talk about in the book that is like another result of doing this in real time is that, we didn't know what the result was going to be. And that was hard for us, like as people, but I think it's also hard for listeners because like as listeners to, a podcast or when you watch a movie or you read a book, like there's an ending, you know, and you know that there's going to be an ending. And I do think that like for some people that was sort of frustrating, like they almost saw us as characters in this story, and it was like frustrating for them that like the story wasn't going, you know, wasn't like reaching the conclusion that
the narrative wasn't
the narrative the narrative was getting kind of like stuck, and it was like, well, like that's because this is our lives, like, you know, I don't know what to tell you, like we're real people and we're doing this in real time, and like that's one of the downsides of it. But that kind of also sometimes made me feel bad, like, oh, I'm not giving the people the story that they want. And then I was like, well, you know,
you're living your life in real time.
I'm living my life. Yeah, exactly.
On a podcast.
Exactly.
I mean, it was incredible. I remember when you got pregnant, because my friend texted me, she like listened before I had a chance to, and she's like, Dory's pregnant. And I was like,
oh my God,
what? And it was like, I just remember like feeling these things for somebody that like, I was so overwhelmed, and I was so happy for you and so excited. And I was like, wait a minute, Elizabeth, like this is just, but it was because you brought us all along, you know, I mean, it's like, we felt invested in it. And I have to say about the book, what I was really impressed by as a writer was you can get very easily bogged down in the medical stuff of IVF, and people who are in IVF want to talk about that, right? Like, I want to know you know, how many retrievals you had, how many transfers, like that's the language. But what you did so well is talk about the emotions and the feelings. And like when you said you leased that big car, so because you're like, of course you're going to put a baby in a car, and then you went like, you got in all these accidents with that car. I mean, I was just like, oh yes, that idea of like planning for this life that you want.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And IVF just like laughs in the face of your plans.
100%. And you just can't even, and that kind of thing, especially like the interactions with Matt when he was, you know, flying back, and he was like, we shouldn't have done this last round. And it's like those sort of like human interactions. I feel like everybody who's tried to conceive, there's some version of that where you know, you're trying to just get through it. Yeah. But I wanted to ask,
and like, I was just going to say, and it's like impossible to not second guess every choice that you make.
Yes, because there's so much on the line. There's so much money. There's so much your emotional and physical health. Like the toll is tremendous. And then you got to like walk through life and be like, I'm doing my job, you know, like, and it's just it's the worst. It's the worst feeling. And I'm curious too, now that you have a child, you know, now that you have a beautiful baby boy, not a boy anymore, he's 2. What is it like to talk about infertility? Like, how do you feel? Because you had also that comment in the book, a commenter who, when you were pregnant and talking about being, you know, nauseous and stuff, was trying to say like, I can't deal with this. I'm just curious about how you feel about talking about infertility from sort of the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like I always want to be mindful of the fact that I am in the mind of a lot of people, like on the other side of it, quote unquote, and that a lot of people are still really struggling. But it's also like, I don't want to have to qualify everything I say with, I know a lot of people are still struggling. And so that's like a balance that I try to strike sometimes, like being mindful of it, but not, because then that, to me, that also makes me feel like my infertility and my struggle with infertility, like, will always just be part of my story. And it will be, but I don't necessarily always want to like be thinking about it.
Relive it, yes.
Reliving it. Yeah. So yeah, sorry, I've kind of lost the thread. But I think that I think that it will always be there, but it's always a balance. Like one of the anecdotes that I talk about in the book is when I was pregnant, I was interviewing doulas, and there was this one doula who was like, what's your birth plan? And I was like, my birth plan is to like have a healthy baby. And she like that was like not enough for her. Like she was like, just because you did IVF, and I was like, well, you know, I did IVF and I like went through so much to even get pregnant. Like, I just really want to have just a healthy kid. That's like all I care about. And she was like, just because you did IVF doesn't mean that like you don't deserve to have a birth plan. And I was just kind of like, you know what, lady, like,
No, let's not say that. Yeah. Like,
Right. And so I don't know. There's just I felt like I was stuck between like not wanting my infertility to like overshadow everything, but also kind of always being aware that it was like there, if that makes sense.
yeah. What I actually really appreciate, and so when I was in therapy talking about my infertility, my therapist told me, she's like, this is not your story. This is a chapter in your book. And reading your book, I was like, look, it is. It really is for Dory. It's
Yeah.
chapters in her book, and it's like, there's a lot that
Yeah.
came before and there's a lot that's coming after. And like that, I just, it sort of made me tear up reading your book, because I was like, yes, this is how you can think about infertility and you can talk about it and honor what you guys went through, certainly. But it's part of your story. I know we're up on time here, but I just wanted to ask one more question. I'd asked on Instagram if people had questions for you, and somebody said, and I thought this was a great question, not just for infertility, but for your whole book, how do you deal with the waiting? And there is so much waiting in infertility. And that was the hardest thing for me always, because when you're not doing something, you're just hoping and waiting. And because so much of life is about waiting, right? I'm just curious if you have any tips in infertility or beyond about how to handle the waiting.
Yeah. And I mean, my book is called Thanks for Waiting.
Yeah.
So, we've gotten this question a few times on the podcast, and what I always like to tell people is I think it really helps you mentally to have a plan. So, what I mean by that is when you're waiting, whether it's, you're waiting for your egg retrieval results or your pregnancy test or whatever, think about what you're going to do if it doesn't go the way that you want it to. And like really play that out. And I know that sounds like almost like counterintuitive. Like, why would I want to like think and dwell on the thing that I like don't want? But I think it actually brings a sort of peace, and it also gives you a plan. Like if it doesn't work out, like you're not just going to be kind of at sea, like you know what you're going to do. And for me personally, when we were waiting for the transfer results for Henry, we had developed a plan. Like we knew what we were going to do after that. We were going to go to a different clinic and try one more retrieval. And so just kind of knowing that in my head, like I was very pessimistic and like sure that it wasn't going to work. And so I just like thought about this plan a lot. And so that made me dwell less on what my results were going to be and more like, okay, like I know what's going to happen if it doesn't go the way I want it to. So that's what I would suggest.
That's wonderful advice. Well, thank you, Dory. Congratulations. I'm so excited for you. Thanks for all that you've shared and all that you've written.
Oh, well, thank you for doing this.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Hi, Dory.
Hi.
Hi. Well, that is the end of our programming for the evening. And I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight for night one of the Worth the Wait launch. For those of you who have bundled tickets, we'd love for you to stick around for a short Q&A with Dory. And for everyone else, we are excited to see you tomorrow night. So thank you so much. And reminder that if you're sticking around for the Q&A, please, any questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. And I think with that, we're probably ready to get going. So I know we have a few questions here in the chat. And again, if anybody wants to add anything right now, please do. But I am going to start with a question from Kendall Ridgway, who said, Dory,